Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the preposterous of movies either starring about or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for the Geek Show and Byline Times, and a short filmmaker. And I've been joined this week by...
But I guess I'm your podcasting wife at this point. We've been doing things together for so long. But I'm Rob, the host of Uncut Network. And
pushing 10 years, isn't it?
Is it really? Oh, wow.
I remember that the first show we did together was Best of 2014 one. So
yeah,
it's coming up.
It's going back.
Yeah.
What sort of anniversary is that? That's pretty low on the sort of scale of items.
I think in marriage terms it's not much, but in podcast terms it's definitely...
It's like diamond or something in podcast terms. I don't know. Yeah, but in marriage terms it's like, this pewter stone that they found in the drive one time.
Yeah. In marriage terms it's recyclable tin can.
Yeah.
So, this is really exciting actually, because I hadn't watched this movie before, but when you suggested it, it struck me that the person who we're going to be talking about most today has had probably the most successful musician to actor career since Sinatra.
It's him, Bowie, and Sinatra. I mean, that's weird company.
What a super group.
But yeah, them three have sort of taken to it like ducks to water, really. Yeah.
The thing is, even with Bowie, it's who, I'm a great fan of his acting as well as his music, but when he pops up in something like The Prestige or the Twin Peaks movie, there is still that element of, fancy seeing you here. And that does not happen at all with Ice Cube, does it?
No. I mean, he's not a great actor. You're going to get Ice Cube if you cast Ice Cube. But
yeah,
he brings a level of charisma that I think very few actors turned musicians ever do.
Completely. And I think when you look at his early roles in something like this or The Glass Shield, the directors involved are casting Ice Cube, and they are doing interesting things with the idea of casting Ice Cube.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few of us that have had equally long careers in rap and hip hop. I mean, Ice-T, I don't rate him particularly for his music, but as an actor, I think he's done especially well for himself.
He's done good, hasn't he? Yeah, he's still going.
Yeah, hang on, which is it? CSI? No, Law and Order. He's done well.
I think it is Law and Order. Yeah, I always get him mixed up as well.
Yeah, there's a crime and they've got to solve it in an hour, and it's like a sliding scale of how miserable those shows are. With Law and Order being the most miserable at one at the other end.
Yeah. But this is Boys in the Hood. This is John Singleton's debut film. The statistics about where his career was at this point are staggering, and this is something that will never happen again. That John Singleton went to film school. At the age of 21, he was given like a $6 million budget to make his first film, and it made him the first African-American director to get a Best Director nomination at the Oscars.
He made that at 21. That kind of insulting, really.
Yeah. But it never happens now, does it? Like, I'm always really depressed when I read interviews with particularly like new British directors always have this story where it's like, oh, well, I went to film school and everyone's agreed that I was the best director there, and I made a short that got into Cannes and it won an award, and then spent 20 years polishing Stephen Daldry's BAFTAs for him, and then they gave me the chance to make a debut film. So, whoa, 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 hang on, hang on. Everything seemed to be going on a certain trajectory up to a point.
And there's the other ones as well, where they just seem prodigiously talented and prodigiously young, like Rose Glass. But
Yeah,
you look, and she's not as young as you might suspect, considering she just came out of nowhere.
they
Because in
never
this
are now.
country, you just like decades and decades of making short films. It's the same with,
Yeah,
can't remember the name of it. I know I'm picking horror, but I can't really pick any sort of young directors outside of that who aren't just basically nepo babies in the bad
yeah,
terms of they're just posh. They're just posh, and
yeah,
the daddy gave them a lot of money. But horror, it seems a bit more naturalistic. The other one being the censor director, Prano Bailey Bond, who did a lot of
mm,
shots. That's the way we do it over here. Loads of
yeah,
shots.
yeah.
One shot sort of goes well, and then loads of money. But I mean, I don't think £10 million or dollars. How much was it? 10 million at 21-year-old.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think $10 million, £10 million even exists in the UK film industry. So get a
Yeah.
121-year-old. You know, it's something. It's something.
It's one of those things where, like, in some ways, this is a better. That people talk about the modern era as a better era for black representation in films, but part of you
Yeah.
also thinks, is it? It's like there's more black representation in big blockbusters, but you don't get films like this. Or, I mean, I saw Eve's Bayou, Casey Lemons' first film recently. And that's the same thing. That was someone who was fresh out of film school. She had this really different, unique screenplay that wasn't based on anything. She just wrote it.
Hmm.
And people like Samuel L. Jackson and Lynn Whitfield said, yeah, we want to be in this. So she got like a $10 million budget. And you think, all right, that's not a good trade-off, is it? It's like it's nice that we're getting slightly more black representation in bad Disney movies, but not at the
Yeah.
expense of this.
Yeah, and better black representation in America about indie dramas, which every single one is about gentrification.
Yeah,
I don't think that's great representation. Representation should be stories of all kinds, not just this one specific lane that you're supposed to stick in and stick there good,
yeah. Do you
which is
think
what
that
Hollywood's doing. Yeah.
maybe they get the money to make gentrification dramas because it's like the one thing about African American life that rich white people know exists at the moment?
That's true. And it's largely their fault. So, it's
Yeah,
kind of like sort of swaying them of guilt somewhat.
I want to make a film about that family I evicted. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. They're fine. Everything's fine in the world for them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, so I was reading up on his inspiration for this. Do you know what film he cited as an inspiration for Boys in the Hood?
I mean, if I was being basic, be saying, I can never remember the name of it, the Spike Lee one. Do
To
the
do
right
the right
thing,
thing.
if it was being basic, but probably not.
Yeah, you'd think it would be something like that, but it was Stand By Me.
Really?
Yeah,
That's unexpected.
you can sort of see it. I mean, you can see it in specific things because he was talking about the scene where it starts with this quite long sort of flashback to the lead character's childhood. And part of it is that they go down the train tracks because they've been told there's a dead body there, which of course is like the central thing in Stand By Me. But also coming to it for the first time, being very aware of this film's reputation, I was quite charmed to see that there's a lot of, I, when I say standard, I mean it affectionately. There's a lot of standard, relatable, kind of coming of age stuff in here.
There is, yeah. I mean, that just on the plot a little bit, it's on this viewing that I realised that that dead body is pretty much the guy that was shot by Lawrence Fishburne, and they just never put it together until I watched it this time. Just a
I'd never
dead
put
guy.
that together. Yeah.
But yeah, just the yeah, but the coming of age stuff, especially in the opening sort of salvo,
Mm,
that's just really elegant, simple, universal story of a kid without a dad, and
yeah.
it's told really, really well and very, very maturely for a 21-year-old.
Yeah. I mean, even when they get to adulthood, there's a lot of stuff about them sharing stories about their buddy being caught having sex with his girlfriend by her grandparents, which is like it's it's not what you think of when you think of Boys in the Hood, but I think the film is richer for having that in there.
No, it's that sort of a stereotype, isn't it, that plagued gangster rap as well. It plagues this movie all the
Mm.
same, which I'm sure we'll loop around to, or just leave it sort of hanging there as a comment for now.
No, I think you do have to talk about gangster rap when you talk about this because at this point, Ice Cube had he just left NWA, hadn't he?
It was post NWA, and I think it was. I don't know the sort of the timeline of the year, but it was around the time he released America's Most Wanted.
Yeah. So
So
he
which
was
came
like
first?
he was in every sense of the word radioactive. He was a hot property, and for a
Oh,
lot of
yeah,
people, he was too hot to handle. He was massively controversial.
too hot to handle in every sense of the word because the establishment they didn't really like NWA. I don't know
Fair to
why.
say. Yeah. I researched a bit of this show by reading Can't Stop, Won't Stop by Jeff Chang, which is a book that's slightly out of date now, was published in about 2005, but as a chronicle of hip hop coming of age, it's very good. And it has some reviews of his second album, Death Certificate, in, which are amazing. One from the New Republic that says, this kind of consumption of racist stereotypes of brutality towards women, or even of uplifting tributes to Dr. Martin Luther King, is of particularly corrupting kind. The values it instills find their ultimate expression in the ease in which we watch young black men killing each other in movies, on records, and on streets of cities and towns across the country. So there you go. If you listen to Death Certificate or indeed partake in an uplifting tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King, you are killing black people.
It's like that meme, isn't it? It's like a guy who's just sat there and the plane it's flying over their head. It's like that's you, and that's the plane is the point, going way over his head.
But I was sort of thinking a lot about gangster rap in the run up to making this, and I think part of it is sort of still unresolved, isn't it? Because there were
Yeah,
when it was the hot new thing, when it was a key sort of current musical form, there were arguments for and against it about whether it glamorizes violence or whether it just reports on violence. And when you actually listen to some of the records back, it's
yeah,
kind of still hard to draw the line, isn't it?
yeah. It straddles that line quite a lot.
Mm,
I mean, the relationship that has with women, you can't really sort of sugarcoat that. But I think Ice Cube does get around with it with a few songs by
mm,
uh, providing a platform for like women rappers to sort of refute that sort of sexism. But as far
yeah.
as the violence goes, it is documenting it,
Mm,
but it's also doing it in character,
yeah.
which makes it. Are they celebrating that point, or are they just saying this is the life that we live and that's the way we have to live it? I mean, NWA song "Express Yourself" maybe like pokes through that a little bit because it does sort of. Well, it just pokes a hole in the whole sort of bravura of it.
Yeah. And I think that that's maybe part of the complications of gangster rap is that the scene was sort of snuffed out at a point before it could really address these tensions and address the sort of
Yeah.
the sort of whole matter of, are you like giving a voice to Black America, or are you doing something that, you know, white people can listen to as a rebellious thing, or both? Can you do both? And
Yeah,
it's like
it is
it's still
both.
hard to say. Yeah.
I think NWA were actually documenting it. I mean, they
Hmm.
didn't help themselves by making a song called "Fuck the Police." That kind of hurt them a little bit. It's safe to say. But yeah, they were documenting it. But the stuff which sort of identifies as gangster rap now, yeah, there's no sort of debate there. That's purely celebratory.
What would
It's
you class as like modern gangster rap?
well, the artists are too many, and they're all got ridiculous names. But
Is it like that SoundCloud stuff where they all sound
yeah,
like drug
yeah,
names from the Brass Eye Drugs episode?
yeah, I can't remember him specifically, but there was a really nice little video that I can't remember. It was somebody from Public Enemy did for
Mm,
Double Down News about young rappers writing songs about killing other young rappers. It's sort of celebrating the deaths of young black men. It's a really
yeah.
good video. If you've not seen it, I would recommend checking it out. Um, Language is a bit saucy, but
Yeah,
it
well,
is what it is.
yeah. Yeah, I hadn't seen that. It, but yeah, that's sort of always been part of the tension of it. And
Hmm.
I think when you look back at early Ice Cube, not just at the music, but at the interviews, there's a part of it which is just nihilism. But there's also a part of it that, needs
Yeah.
to be said. I think he is expressing a genuine hopelessness that he felt at that point, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
true.
he's. I think he's mentioned it as well, but he is one of
Yeah.
the more subversive of that era, I believe. Anyway.
No, I would say that's absolutely true. I mean, we did a podcast recently about Blazing Saddles, and we really tore into that whole kind of, oh, you'd never be able to make that today. Nowadays, people only like the safe PC westerns of Quentin Tarantino. But it's like, if you want a cultural artifact that you absolutely could not make today, Death Certificate by Ice Cube is unbeatable. It's just that middle-aged white guys seem slightly less pressed about the fact that you couldn't do that today.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea that when you talk about music, what you can and can't do today, because I think rap, especially hip hop, especially, has been at the forefront of kind of saying you don't really need labels,
Yeah,
like major labels. You can just sort of
yeah,
go out and
yeah.
do it on your own through digital platforms, through Spotify, and you're getting this, class of new rappers who
Mm.
probably 10 years ago you couldn't do that.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a liberating freedom in what they're doing. I mean, Billy Woods, I'll always shout out Billy Woods because he's my favorite current rapper. But yeah, it's a bit more liberated now, whilst also the sort of successful end of it being that sort of idea of gangster rap that all the sort of pearl clutching people would have you believe it to be.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's a fair point. That old argument about how, oh, gangster rap is just selling black stereotypes for white record bosses to make money off. It's like, well, now it's on Spotify, so now it's on SoundCloud, so that's kind of cut out of the equation a bit.
It's
Arista
just
aren't
making
profiting on this.
a Swedish company an awful lot of scratch and then basically nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Spotify was a bad example in this case, but
Yeah, there's no. It's the big one. It's the big one.
yeah. But back to Boys in the Hood, you've got that debate about sort of black-owned businesses and why we need them at the centre of one of the film's most fascinating scenes, which is where Lawrence Fishburne's character like talks about gentrification when they
Yeah,
see the soul to soul realty, which I think is a. He
it
starts off
was.
by
Sorry,
saying, "So go,
it was spelt soul to soul, as in the Korean soul. Is all I was going to
yeah,
sort of add to that.
yeah,
Yeah, just added
sorry, yeah,
context.
that is important because there was a massive tension between the black community and Korean Americans at the time that's reflected on like the most radioactive track on Death Certificate, um, on Black Korea, which I think came out in the same year as this. But
Yeah, I think so. 92.
mm, it's funny that because it's like I don't think there's anything in it that's disagreeable. And Fishburne says at the start of it when they start talking about Koreans, he says it's the 90s, you can't hate a whole race anymore. But it's also odd that that's like the one piece of structural critique in the movie. It's like everything else is very focused on what hell it is living in the ghetto and what a bad response to that hell joining a gang is. But what I think you would get if the movie was made now is that there would be some awareness of why black people live in those conditions, and there'd be a debate about that. Whereas part of the sort of horror of Boys in the Hood and part of the reason why it's powerful is that no one cares about that. It's just, well, we're here and it's shit and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, there's a line that Ice Cube says towards the end, and this is, "If I die, I die. It was just my time."
Yeah,
Sort
yeah,
of a resignation to this is just the way it is. I don't think
absolutely.
sort of like talking about it and having a debate about it. I don't think that's the movie for it. This is a pure drama, very very good drama, but a pure drama.
Mm.
It's not trying to be anything more.
Yeah, absolutely. It tended to get bracketed at the time with Menace to Society, which I also saw for the first time a couple of years back when the Criterion UK put it out. Have you ever seen Menace to Society, Rob?
Not in a while. Saw these things in the 90s when they were sort of. I don't want to use the term culturally relevant because these movies are never not culturally relevant, but
Mm.
when it was at its sort of peak.
Yeah. I think Menace to Society is sort of interesting companion piece because that is, in a lot of ways, closer to the tone of Ice Cube's music. It is totally nihilistic, and to the extent where I actually find it funny that people were saying, "Oh, this will influence people to become gangsters." Like, if you watch Menace to Society and you come out thinking it looks fun to be a gangster, you are already a psychopath. No movie will set you straight there. But I like that. I mean, I think Menace to Society is great, but I like that in Boys in the Hood, Ice Cube is allowed to represent that kind of burned out attitude, but he's also like one voice in a chorus. There's a lot of people in this movie who have a lot of different takes on life, I think.
Yeah, he's an interesting character, especially a role that complex and nuanced to put on such a young pair of shoulders.
Yeah, yeah,
Because people forget how young they were in NWA.
yeah,
They weren't seasoned vets. They were late teens, early 20s, which
yeah,
makes what they were doing even more fearless. And
yeah.
just a few years removed from that, he's got this role which, as you put in the sort of the note for this recording, South Central pain. That's
Mm,
what he's sort of
yeah.
embodying. He comes out of prison after 7 years, and my word, do they fill out after 7 years, especially Doughboy,
Yeah.
which is the name of his character.
How do you think that conversation went where they said to Ice Cube, "We want you to play a guy called Doughboy"?
Well, don't know the reasoning behind Ice Cube. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, he's this character who doesn't want to go back to jail again, but
Mm.
he also has to, and he wants to look after his family. And he acknowledges the fact that his younger brother, or is it older brother? That's younger, isn't it?
It's his younger brother, yeah, Ricky.
Wants to become sort of a football, go on a scholarship. He's protecting his brother fiercely,
Mm.
but he realizes to do that he has to sort of puff his chest out and be that bravura sort of a
Yeah.
gang guy, really. So he kind of straddles that line. That's a lot to put on someone so young, but I think his music showed that he had that sort of self awareness.
I think so, yeah. And someone so young and someone so new to acting, because he'd never acted before this. I mean, you can make an
Yeah,
argument that any successful stage performance is a kind of acting, but he hadn't carried an arc. He hadn't been given a monologue as he is towards the end of this.
it's tragic and heartbroken monologue.
It's brilliant.
Because that's the thing, they've got that experience to play off of.
Mm,
An
mm,
actor who would be doing that, like the Key and Peele sketch, which I think is particularly pertinent, where they've got this guy who's a gangster, played by Peele,
mm.
and there's an English actor played by Key, and he's
Right.
classically English. And the
Yeah.
actor says, the actor says, no, I like the English guy. He's doing it really, really well. But John Peele
Yeah.
says, no, but I grew up on the streets and I'm real and I'm all this and I'm all that. But yeah, I imagine that sort of fake, sort of an actor calling upon sort of acting experience to recall that pain. It wouldn't quite feel as real. I know it's a term that so many directors like, hang on, but real in this sort of situation is the difference between it working and being just grandstanding.
No, absolutely. And there's another bit in the Ice Cube chapter in Can't Stop, Won't Stop, which I think offers a slight window into this, which talks about him just after NWA had broke up and when he's preparing to launch his solo career. Ice Cube had just been through 2 years of turmoil. After coming off a tour that had ended with something close to a police riot, he returned home to the same bed he'd slept in as a teenager. His mom had him washing the dishes and taking out the trash. The house got fired on mistakenly in a gang drive-by. And I think there's something in that
Yeah,
collision of
yeah.
like stardom and violence and also still being kind of a kid and certainly treated like a kid, still living with your parents, still doing the chores. You could see all of that working together in this film.
Yeah, yeah, and those little houses as well. It just
Mm.
it creates like this little pop boiler for all of these little instances that happen in.
In terms of the family stuff, I absolutely adore Tyra Ferrell as the baker's mother. Where like the first time you see her, she's got like rollers in her hair, cigarette dangling out of her mouth. She's swearing up a storm in front of her kids and trying to pump everyone for gossip about all the other kids' parents. And you suddenly think like for all there's a danger in a white British person watching Boys in the Hood and finding it exotic or like hard to relate to or any of these things,
Oh
you
no,
look at her and you think, oh yeah, I know that woman. I've met hundreds of that woman.
working class is working class. It's just the sort of
Yes,
the fixtures around that which change from place to place. But yeah,
completely.
there's like the fixtures like violence, gangs, other things like this. It changes from town to town. I'm not being totally desensitive and discounting all sorts here, but just explain myself there. But yeah, women like that,
Yeah,
loads of them. Got a few in my family. I'll be
yes,
honest.
same. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think all of that stuff is very strong. I feel very envious towards anyone who has Lawrence Fishburne and Angela Bassett as parents because, man,
Yeah, you forget that Lawrence Fishburne was young, but wow, this is a long time ago. This movie wasn't it?
well, Lawrence Fishburne never was. Larry Fishburne was the young one, and then
Ah,
he
yeah.
sort of came out of the chrysalis of Larrydom and became Lawrence as soon as he became a older character actor.
It's such a wild decade for him as well. Like 1990. I mean, let's say this was shot in 1990,
Mm.
and what 98? He's Morpheus in the Matrix, and
He is, yeah, yeah.
the decade was really kind to him.
Middle of the decade, he became. I mean, we mentioned John Singleton becoming the first Black Best Director nominee. Another thing that happened to Black Hollywood later than it should have is that in 1996, I think it was, Lawrence Fishburne became the first black actor to play Othello on screen.
That's ridiculously long time. When
I
was it? Like
know, right?
it's
It
a few
had
hundred years. It took.
well, it had happened on stage. Paul Robeson and other black actors had played
Ah,
Othello on stage, but film-wise, yeah, it's just like white people with boot polish on their face all the way down until
mm,
'96.
yeah, that's pretty gross, really, isn't it?
Really is, yeah.
But Hollywood has a good habit of being pretty gross. It's got like lots of practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, them two as parents, um, it's a fiery relationship, and I think it adds a
Yeah.
class. Especially, I mean, I don't know then. I don't know what her sort of station was in early '90s, but
I think
looking at it,
it was pretty early for Bassett. I think she only really broke through as kind of a leading actress with What's Love Got to Do with It, which is a couple of years after this.
hmm. So history, looking back makes it, a bit more
Yeah,
significant than it is. But at the time, it was just two hungry young actors. I think they do
totally.
incredibly well. Well, not really opposite each other, but let's just say it for
Hmm.
convenience's sake.
I think Fishburne's character is so interesting here because he's definitely meant to
Yeah,
be Singleton's mouthpiece, but he's a
he's got the best
flawed
name.
man.
Let's give him his full name. It's Furious Styles. That's his name.
Furious Styles, yeah. Harry's dad.
Yeah, and he is a financial advisor. Furious Styles, the financial advisor. He is a weird character, but he's brilliant. He's absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant.
But I think that part of what like elevates this over something like the next film that Singleton did with Ice Cube and Lawrence Fishburne, Higher Learning, which even Singleton later admitted was really preachy, is that for all Furious Styles, I'm never going to stop using it now you've reminded me of it. For all he's saying stuff that you suspect Singleton agrees with, he doesn't dominate the conversation. Like Higher Learning becomes a bit unbearable because Fishburne's playing a university professor, and after everything happens, it's like Professor Fishburne stands in front of the class and tells you what you should have thought about that incident. But here, like Ice Cube, he's one voice in many.
Yeah, yeah, and it works because there's nuance to the character. He's not just the
Yeah.
person who rants and raves. He's also a dad who cares deeply about his son. And
Mm,
it's the same with like the instigators of gang violence. It would be very easy for John Singleton just to basically have these people who they meet sort of offhand at just sort of a hangout of loads of kids,
yeah.
and that's it. Next thing you see him, the shooting. Next thing you see him, whatever happens to them, happens to them. But in this, it's got scenes around that. It's got scenes, well, one scene in particular where they're at a takeaway, just
Yeah.
eating, and it humanizes them, I think, in a way which it shows it's not just a movie that's ranting and raving. It's a movie
Yes.
which actually realizes that there's shades of grey to everything that's going on there. And I think it's stupidly mature for a 21-year-old. When I was 21, oof, I wasn't thinking with that sort of coherence, I'll be honest.
No, absolutely not. No. But it's that kind of hangout stuff. I try to avoid getting sucked into nostalgia, but when you look back at 90s movies, you do realize we've lost a lot of that kind of hangout quality to movies. Nowadays, people
Yeah,
feel actively bothered if every scene isn't like driving the plot forward. And 90s movies are obviously always very aware that there is a value to just sort of pressing pause for a bit and just hanging out with the characters.
because plot wise, I mean, on my podcast, I say, so what would Boys in the Hood be about? And
Mm,
the person who I'd ask that to would really, really struggle because it's not
yeah,
really about anything. It's
yeah.
just, I don't know what sort of the time frame is, but it's just spending time with these two families over however long it might be. And it ends
It's about
tragically.
yeah, it's about 7 years. If this came out in 91, at the start of it, they're walking past posters for the 84 national election. So if we assume it's set in the present day in the scenes with them as adults, then it's 7 years in their life.
Yeah. But it's just them hanging around. Ice
Yeah,
Cube a lot of the time with his buddies who were stupid, very, very stupid. And it
yeah,
also has that sort of nuance as well, and not lots of, well, let's just say if this was made modern, the friend who's in a wheelchair, it'd have a flashback to why he's in a wheelchair.
yeah.
It'd flashback all over the place. It feels the need to over embellish. Whereas
Mm,
that's what I love about 90s cinema a lot of the time. It let
yeah.
scenes breathe. It was just, here are some characters and we're going to spend some time with them.
I think that's a massive factor in what makes movies develop cults. You know, what moves
Mm.
something in beyond just being a film that everyone likes and into something that has a lasting cult is that they have these side characters where you were invited to wonder what their deal is and what their backstory is without it being spelled out.
And there's another character who's exactly the same. Is basically a woman who's addicted to crack, who lives over the street, who constantly lets her babies just sort of walk on in the middle of the
Yeah.
road. It's like a running. I hate to use the word gag, but if horror movies can describe jump scares as gags, I can
Yeah.
use this as a. I can describe this as a gag too. But it's just little bits like that around the side, which is just here is a world, and we're just passing through it for a little bit.
Yeah, and I love when she comes back into it at the end when she interrupts that big monologue that Doughboy has, and he just like screams at her to fuck off. And I think that's
Yes.
really powerful when it's placed there because it's just reminding you that this guy is never going to be able to fight back against the people who are really responsible for his life being shit. You know, all he can do
Mm.
is, at best, kill other gang members. At worst, just like scream at people who are lower down the social pecking order than him. And I guess
Mm.
in its own way, that's the structural critique that I wrongly said wasn't in the film. It's like there isn't a speech where Lawrence Fishburne explains neoliberal economics to the kids on the corner, and I don't think they'd be interested in that. But I think Singleton knows what why this is a tragedy and why this is going to perpetuate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the one note I have about it. One thing that I really don't like about it is the way it ends and the
Mm,
way it explains what happens to certain characters. I think this sort of movie is better when it's just left to the mystery. It sort
yeah,
of
I think you.
sets a stall like we know what's going to happen.
Mm,
The way he is defeated and dejected, Doughboy,
yeah,
the way he's consigned to fate, I think letting the audience understand that that's what's happened here, rather than having the text come up, which I feel is one of those things that happens a lot in American cinema. I fear it was sort of the product of a test screening where it was like a
maybe.
predominantly white audience, and
Yeah,
the white people won't understand what happened there. They won't get it,
yeah.
because test audiences seem to be the worst. No offense if you've been a member of one of them, but a lot of the sort of the most egregious edits that have happened to movies have came as sort of a result of bad test screenings.
It's quite possible, yeah. I know David Cronenberg does like very focused test screenings where he's like, I don't know if this works. I don't know if this makes sense. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is a good scene to have in. And he asks for opinions on that. But like, if someone comes back saying, I think it's a bit gory, just like throws it out the window because who gives a shit.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I know what you mean about that card. I see it a lot in like older coming of age movies. I think American Graffiti might have been the first to do it. And yeah, it's I don't mind it, but it's not as devastating as just seeing Doughboy fade out as he walks across the street.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end the movie. Having
Mm,
that card come up, it's like, yeah, obviously we didn't need to see that,
mhm.
but yeah, it's but it was he was given a lot of money as a 21-year-old, so I imagine he had to sort of give up on certain things, and the fact that it came through as coherent, emotional, and complete as it is no small testament to his skill as a young director, and
Absolutely.
it is very emotional a
Yeah.
few points in time as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's a very powerful film. And it's dated very well. I think we've been talking about things that we like that have dated in a sort of good way, and I think one of them is that he's directing a lot, isn't he? There's a lot of sort of push-ins and crane shots, and I always get envious about things like this. I realize, oh, African Americans won't stand for their social realist films to look like dog shit. We need to organize. We need to get a piece of that.
oh yeah, because I don't know if I call it social realism, but Killer of Sheep as well. You can
Yeah,
never accuse that of being shot flat and
yeah.
boring. It's a very expressive movie.
Completely. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, a few years after this, in I don't think it was his next role after this, but it was certainly his next sort of big prominent role after this. Ice Cube was working with Charles Burnett, the director of Killer of Sheep, in the Glass Shield, which also like uses the aura of danger that clung to Ice Cube at this time in a very inventive and clever way.
I never thought of this as social realism, Boys in the Hood, but it is really, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it totally is.
Yeah, it's just weird how interpretations of things vary from culture to culture to country to country.
Well, at the time, it sort of got filed away as like a gangster movie, and I think that's an absolutely inadequate description of it. Like, say, there's a lot of sort of very warm, very universal coming of age material that cushions the crime part of the narrative.
Yes, absolutely. And even calling it a gangster, I think, is missing the point because
Totally.
I don't think Ice Cube's really is in a gang. I think that's
Mm,
sort of one of those messages, just to sort of loop around. It's one of those things that the establishment doesn't like you humanizing in the same way
yeah.
that I imagine Chris, I always forget his name, Four Lions, when
Oh,
Four
Chris
Lions came
Morris.
out.
Yeah.
Yes, Chris Morris, when he humanized sort of what the news called just terrorists, and that's it. If
Hmm.
terrorists did this, terrorists did that, and he made them people. I imagine he,
Yeah.
poked a lot of bears in the same way that I don't think these are gangsters. It's just friends, just groups of
Yeah.
friends, and the fate is sort of written for them, given how sort of violent and unpleasant the atmosphere is there. Through no fault of their own.
Yeah, it's interesting when like you say gangster movie because it's like not every movie that features gangs is a gangster movie. It's like Goodfellas is a gangster movie,
Oh yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
but West Side Story's got gangs in it. Is West Side Story a gangster movie? I'm not entirely convinced it is.
By those definitions that the system and norms have, yeah,
Yeah,
it, it,
if
it's
Boys
it's a
in the Hood
gangster
is a
movie.
gangster movie, then West Side Story is a gangster movie, but no one
Yeah,
calls West Side Story a gangster movie.
yeah. But they're not a gangs. They're not a gang. It's just a bunch of friends hanging outside of Doughboy's house.
Yeah,
That's it, and they just won't
yeah,
go away,
yeah.
despite being told to many, many times.
A couple of things that I wanted to mention before I wanted to move on to Ice Cube's acting career in general because, like I say, it is one of the most, if not the most successful musician turned actor career of our era.
Yeah,
I find the score fascinating because it's like the easy thing to do with this would be to just slather the score in gangster rap, and that does not happen at all. It's by Stanley Clarke, who was a jazz fusion bassist, and it actually comes quite close to a lot of that kind of smooth R&B or slow jams that existed. It was like a
mhm.
parallel strand in Black American music around the same time, and I think it's really effective.
It is. It's a beautiful score, and there's little trimmings of period accurate music,
Mm,
but I don't think that's one of the sort of styles of musician that's not really made the natural transition to being sort of composers for movies. You see it
mm.
in rock music or pop or this or that, but hip hop's always had a hard time doing it because
Yeah.
it's not really that good as incidental music, as mood music. Um, so doing something, I mean, I love hip hop music. I'm not thrown under the bus by any stretch of the imagination, but as a score, as a mood setter, I don't think it really works.
Well, I think one
Having
of the
that,
problems you've got there is that a lot of the biggest stars in hip hop are people whose talents do not lend themselves to instrumental music. Like,
no.
I'm not entire. I love Megan the Stallion. I'm not sure what a Megan the Stallion instrumental album would sound like.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the same, would it? I
No,
mean,
not at all. No.
the closest we've got is Flying Lotus, who's not really
Mm.
scoring. Well, he's scoring a few bits, but he's more interested in directing.
The other one I was thinking of was there have been films scored by DJ Shadow. He has done very good film soundtrack work, and that's the
Yeah.
kind of end of hip hop where you can imagine them like making some
Yeah.
crossover.
but there's not an awful lot who have that
Mm.
sort of power, not power necessarily, but influence to make that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. It's interesting. I wonder if they could. I wonder if there are lots of people who right now are making sort of beats for rappers who could be deployed that way. It's quite
Yeah.
possible that there are.
Well, there's that collective that Flying Lotus does called Brain Feeder, which is full of like instrumental hip hop guys and girls who would make a great transition, but it just doesn't seem to have
Yeah.
happened, really.
I think what I'm really sort of saying is that someone needs to give Bad Bad Not Good a film soundtrack gig. Go on,
Yeah.
do it now.
Well, sort of like jazz hip hop crossover on there. That would make a great score. That sort of.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
are you sure though?
Uh,
That doesn't sound right. You say that, but that sounds like such a natural fit to do a composing job. They have to have had.
maybe they have. Maybe they have, and I've
It
missed
seems too
that.
obvious. It seems too obvious for them not to have had. Really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's extremely stupid if people have missed that one.
Which means it's probably true.
Yeah, there's a lot of stupid decisions being made in the film industry all the time.
Yeah, but yeah, the score is really sort of it plucks at the heartstrings in the right way,
Yeah,
rather than just this is a hip hop movie or a black movie or a gang movie, and we'll just do what that little box says we should.
yeah. It works as movie music while also feeling authentically like part of the community it's documenting, which is it's something I'd be impressed by in a film today, but for a film in 1991, I mean, that was a
Yeah,
massive gulf.
yeah. There was nothing like this in 1991. This
Mm,
was the one that made a lot of the black gang movies in the 90s possible. Really, even though it isn't really one
totally.
of them. So
Yeah.
the studios put it out, but they didn't even know what it was. So that sounds about right for the 90s. It was a weird time for studios in the 90s. A
But,
brilliant time for studios.
yeah,
Yeah.
back then there were studio heads who were like humble enough to think, well, I don't get this, but probably someone does. And
Yeah.
those are always the
That,
golden ages of Hollywood, I think.
that was as a quote of Frank Zappa going around
Yeah.
on social media and YouTube, where he basically says, there's the fat old, you sort of out of touch men smoking cigarettes. They just say yes to everything and put it out, and they say it'll find its audience. But it's the young, cool sort of executives are the ones that you really need to worry about because they're the ones who won't really do anything. And I guess well, we're living in the proof right now, both in the music world and
Totally.
in the movies world. Frank Zappa knew his onions. He knew what he was talking about all those years ago.
Yeah, the other great rock star quote that reminded me of was when EMI got bought out by a private equity firm. Same
Mm.
private equity firm whose boss is now lamenting that he wouldn't have supported Brexit if he known it was going to go this badly. So a solid ability to back a winner, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, when that happened, Tom York had this fantastic quote that was something like, I miss the old EMI, which was basically a manufacturer of nuclear weapons trigger parts who had a passing interest in music.
Wow. Doesn't sugarcoat it, then, man. You don't
No.
sugarcoat it. He's done well for himself in music too, and movie
Yeah,
music. Sorry, a lot of
yeah,
Radiohead have.
absolutely.
Yeah.
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 The Suspiria soundtrack, and he did one with Edward Norton a bit back, didn't he? Yeah.
Mm. That Suspiria one was really good, though. Yeah.
Yeah, I listened to that again a month or two ago, and yeah, it still holds up as a really great album. Like you don't have to put
Yeah.
yourself in a soundtrack frame of mind to listen to that. It's just good.
Yeah. One thing I did want to bring up though is a thing just Ice Cube as a rapper.
Mm,
He's he is one of the most influential, maybe ever. I'd go as far to say
yeah,
because of his era, there's a lot who were very very successful, but the sort of the style and the cadence of how he raps, it doesn't
mm,
feel like 90s rap. A lot of 90s rap had a sort of a very stop starty sort of energy to it.
yeah, and I
Whereas
think
his,
that's
you could take sort of the beats away from his music and put sort of a new beat in, and it'd feel like it was written yesterday. It has that sort of real
yeah.
legacy to his work, I think.
It has that kind of conversational flow, doesn't it? It doesn't feel like someone's trying to press this into a meter, which a lot of older rap
Yeah,
can. I guess it's kind of like it's the price you pay for the fact that rap is ultimately in the position that rock was back in the 60s and 70s, where it is the musical form that is dominant and pressing forward and coming up with new
yeah,
things. And the price of that is that the old stuff dates. When I was growing up, it was always axiomatic that Rakim was the greatest rapper of all time, and to me, he still sounds incredible. But I think if you played him to a bunch of kids who were raised on like Kendrick, maybe that would sound dated. I don't know, but
yeah.
yeah, I think you're right about Ice Cube.
There's a lot of Ice Cube in Kendrick. There's a hell of
Yeah,
a lot of Ice Cube in Kendrick.
yeah, I would agree.
Same sort of area as well. He's from a South
Mm.
Central sort of LA area, and around that sort of place.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. It's quite weird to think that was once like a divide that people got killed over the sort of East Coast, West Coast stuff, and it seems just spectacularly irrelevant to modern hip hop. Like I know Kendrick Lamar's from Compton because he keeps saying it, but it's not something where you have to have a position on it.
Oh, I mean, rappers in such a healthier position now. You can make
Yeah.
all the debates that it's celebrating the murder of black kids and this and that, but at the same time, it's not as black and white, and it's not
Mm.
as tribal. Well, it's tribal. Sure, it's tribal, but it's not as tribal because there's different places around America that are actually producing it.
Yeah.
Atlanta's a hot spot. Massachusetts, is it Massachusetts?
Houston's doing pretty well.
There's
Houston's
a lot of
got Megan
Texan.
and Beyonce.
What was it? I can't remember now. Minneapolis? Yeah, Minneapolis. Minneapolis has
Mm.
got a pretty hot scene of indie rappers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of spread all over the place. A little bit of Canadian stuff. A lot of don't really count Drake. He's just a meme. He's not a rapper. Yeah. There's
No,
other,
I'm,
Canadian ones, but yeah, that aren't
I'm with
memes.
you there. Yeah.
But yeah, it's much healthier, and I think again that might be a cost that's one of the benefits of sort of mainstream notoriety, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But we should close out by talking about Ice Cube in general terms as his in terms of his acting career, because like I say, it amuses me greatly that the first spoken line of one of the great musician turned actor careers is "Domino motherfuckers," but he has come a long way since then. And do you have
Right.
any other personal favorite Ice Cube roles?
Well, not necessarily personal favorite. I just like the sort of he's come to embody that style of role, which was a stereotype once upon a time of the sort of stern-faced black police detective, the one
Mm,
who shouted at the renegade cop who'd do anything to get his man, but you always
yeah,
have to report to a black like chief of police or black chief of the department or whatever. I don't understand police. I don't get it.
yeah,
But he's taken that role, and when he's been asked to do it, he's made it feel a little bit more genuine
yeah.
and less of sort of a tokenist idea. And yeah, I think he does that with everything. Like I said, he's not a good actor, but he's a great Ice Cube,
Mm,
and he has that sort of like Ice Cube's music has anger and humanity in equal measure, I think, and his police
mm.
detectives have that too. It's not just he's an angry black man; he's an angry black man with a bit of heart to him too.
Yeah, with reasons for like being how he is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think The Glass Shield's a great movie, and I think there is every possibility that we'll do a Glass Shield episode of Pop Screen in the future because that has dated extremely well, I think.
Mm.
I think that one of the sort of big things in his acting career is Barbershop, which was like a massive unexpected hit when the first one of those came out. And
Yeah.
I haven't seen the Barbershop film since they first came out, but I remember the first one
It's
really surprising me at how strong it was.
There's Friday as well, isn't there? Which is
Yeah,
in a similar sort of style. But of all of the sort of movies that we get from America, that style of comedy hasn't
Yeah.
really made its translation over here. We don't really. It's not that we don't get it. It's just
Mm.
it was never really exported over here. So it's
Yeah, there was a time which I think like about 10 years ago this started to end, but there was a time when any like black American movie that came out, even if it was a massive hit, you would have to wait at least a year for the fucker to come out in Britain.
yeah,
And that changed, but it changed only in as much as really depressing black movies come out quicker here. If there's a black movie about police brutality or slavery, we are getting that shit right away. But if it's Friday or the barber shop, you're still gonna have to keep your ear to the ground.
yeah, which is weird, really. But yeah,
Mm.
it's not made the transition. And I know to an American listener, this might sound really weird, but considering what you just said, I don't picture Ice Cube in comedy, but he has had a pretty decent career
He's
doing
done
it.
well, yeah.
Yeah,
It was a very canny move to do Friday because that was like mid-90s, right at the point where he was notorious, and you know, it took a leap of faith for people to say America's ready to have a laugh with Ice Cube because
how
maybe
it's
they wouldn't be.
changed
Yeah, yeah,
from
but it
a few
worked.
years a few years prior, a legitimate police riot where things
Yeah,
got a bit heated
got a bit fighty.
to that. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, he is. I know this term's thrown around, but I think he is a national treasure for America. I really do. I think he's great.
he's done amazing stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. And he is the model that a lot of rappers turned actors really borrow from. And I don't think any of them really get it quite as well, do it quite as well as him, especially not LL Cool J, who's I think the Q was really in his name means ladies love cool James. That was never a man with any sort of grace, really, compared
falls
to
off at
someone like
the
Ice
end,
Cube.
doesn't it? It's like
Yeah,
it's very hip and it's full of braggadocio until you realise it's just James. It's like, that's kind of
yeah.
a boring ending.
But Ice Cube, O'Shea Jackson Senior now, yeah,
Yes.
and his son is a clone. It's not his son. It's just they're taking a clipping of him, and it's grown. And
I
it's
mean,
him. It is him.
pe- people talk about the role that an actor was born to play, but O'Shea Jackson Jr. in Straight Outta Compton is literally the role he was born to play.
Yeah, and that is a very good movie as well, which
Still haven't checked that out. I should do that.
I think, like his dad in Ice Boys in the Hood, he does an awful lot of the heavy lifting in that one too.
Possible future pop screen in that as well, I think.
Because even I guess in this we haven't mentioned him in this podcast. I guess Cuba Gooding Jr. is the lead
Mm.
character, but is he really? I'm not so sure. I think it's
Well,
more Ice Cube's.
Doughboy's one of those supporting characters who steal the movie, isn't he? He's not
Yeah,
the character who has the through line. He's maybe not the character you're meant to relate to, but in terms of someone who steals the movie, it's between Cube and Lawrence Fishburne.
yeah. And just on that, I think we have to mention the most powerful scene in the entire movie. It's not the death. It's the scene with Cuba Gooding Jr. and the black policeman with the gun.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
horrifying scene, beautifully acted by both parties, but it's just
yeah,
such an ugly scene. Yeah,
yeah, completely. Yeah. I find it fascinating that we are meant to read that cop as like self-hating, which we certainly do. But one of the things that codes him as self-hating is that he keeps on using the N-word. You think, oh yeah,
yeah,
there were slightly different attitudes towards black people using that word back then, weren't they? It was a bit more controversial than it is now.
yeah, yeah. They've taken ownership of the word, which I still think is a little bit problematic, knowing its history. But it's not as bad as the history
Yeah,
of the word MF, which is the history of that, and you'll
I
never
don't.
use it again.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Well, the name is they said that because that's what it was. That's what they
Mm,
forced mothers and sons to.
Jesus.
It was grim in that era of America,
Yeah.
in the slavery era. Very, 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 very grim.
I'm very fond of the bit in Derek Jarman's Sebastian where the subtitles translate somebody yelling Oedipus as motherfucker.
There we go. Lifted the mood a little bit.
Yeah, a joke for classics graduates there.
But yeah, this is, for me, this is one of the best movies in the 90s. It's really a remarkable piece of work, I think.
Yeah, I'm really glad I watched it. But yes, Rob, where can people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on social media across too many, but I'm consolidating on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd under Uncut Robcast. And you can follow the podcast, the Uncut Network, and wherever you find your podcasts. I'm alternating weeks with this one.
I'm on Instagram at Graham W Film. You can also find me on Letterboxd just by searching for Graham Williamson. And if you want more Pop Screen, of course, we have it on our Geek Show Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where you'll also find our other podcasts last night and From the Video Aisle, not available anywhere else, as well as written reviews of Red Dwarf, The X-Files, Doctor Who, and classic Asian genre cinema in Fantastic Asia. But until next fortnight, when we'll be back with more Pop Screen, I've been Graham.
And I have been Rob.
And we'll see you later.